because Sam, as always, has way too much material. So, in order to make sure we get to see it, let's get going. I'm David Crossley. I'm president of Houston Tomorrow. And as many of you know, we do this Livable Houston meeting in this room. I've been doing this since November of '99 every month on the fourth Wednesday. I will say the next, let me note this, that the next meeting, which is a month from now, will be about Galveston Bay. Scott Jones, I can never remember the name of that estuary program, but Scott's pretty well known. And this will be pretty good, state of the bay kind of thing. And then in October, we already have that planned. Molly Scarborough, who's a senior planner with the city of Houston, will come and talk about their transit-oriented development programs there.
City of Austin.
City of Austin, I'm sorry. City of Austin, which is actually extensive kind of stuff going on there, so that'll be good. Some other things that are happening in September 24th and 25th. I hope you got this. We're going to have a two-day conference on mega regions and metro prosperity. And the list of speakers is just sort of off the charts. I mean, this is going to be a full and rich event. So don't mess with talking about how all these giant metro regions work together to be one thing and what that means and how we're going to deal with issues like transportation and energy and green infrastructure and water. And so the flyers about that up here. And then a couple of really cool things that are going to happen. On September 30th, in our Distinguished Speaker Series, John Norquist, who's the CEO of the Congress for the New Urbanism, former mayor of Milwaukee, who was a great urbanist mayor up there and was actually responsible for removing a freeway, one of those 4 or 5 cities that removed the downtown freeway. He's a great speaker, a tough guy, and he's really terrific. So he'll be talking about urbanism. And then a month later, the distinguished speaker will be Andres Duane, who's one of the co-founders of the Congress for the New Urbanism, an unbelievable speaker who insists on an hour and a half, so be prepared. And he'll be talking about agricultural urbanism, his new passion, the idea of farms and cities and villages and raising food. So, and we aren't sure where that's going to be yet, so just kind of stay in touch. Is that it? Oh yeah, always on, of course, November 3rd, don't forget to vote, Election Day. And then on November 12th, we'll be having a tribute to George Mitchell. We'll be at the Petroleum Club, and this is a fundraiser, so tickets are available. You can find all this stuff is on our website at houstontomorrow.org. So a lot of you know Sam. Sam's been in the forefront of a whole lot of stuff having to do with transit and transportation in Houston. He led the regional commuter rail study that the HGAC did last year. Was it last year? And he works a lot overseas too, so he's got a real interesting handle on how some of the systems work, circulators and other stuff. So this is the sort of last mile stuff. What do you do, once you get off the train out of town or the medical center? What could happen next to make it easier for us to get around? So, without further ado, Sam.
Thank you, David. As you said, I've got way too much material, so I'm going to go fast, and I'm going to probably skip some stuff. When we first started talking, I sent him some technical papers I presented about some analytical work a few months ago, and said, do you think this is material that they'd be interested in? And he said, well, they probably would. Unfortunately, that's probably the stuff I'm going to skip today, because the other stuff I think is more important for this forum. If we have time, we'll see. David's going to be my timekeeper. But I'm going to talk through these things with regard to what we're calling the last mile issue. Now let me warn you, those of you that are dealing with urban districts where the street system's working well and circulator buses are the solution, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the problem we have brewing with that we're not addressing in our very dense urban districts. But we'll go through all that. First of all, this is a proposal for this city in some of our most serious conditions as I look out in the future. We have urban districts in very close proximity to each other. This is Texas Medical Center and downtown in the distance. that are some of the densest in the country. And we are not thinking ahead enough on how we're going to move people around within those districts. We are starting to think about how we get people to the districts in large quantities, but we're not yet thinking about how we move them around within the districts. In fact, in basically a 4-mile radius, if my Google Map skills are any good, we have 4 major business districts. And in fact, each of these 4, if they were a central business district, last time I checked, would rank in the top 15 central business districts in the country. We have 4 of them within a 4-mile radius of each other. We also have a situation where this part of town is densifying very rapidly. If you've driven around any, other than in the parts that are zoned, you're seeing that densification happen right before your eyes. The other problem we have, this is a graphic from an old report, is that our freeway system that surrounds this densest urban area is breaking down. Even the parts that are brand new. And I know because I live right here, and the parts that we just finished rebuilding at peak hours, we're already back at level of service F, cascaded all the way back through the system. And that surrounds these urban districts. We must use transit to even get people to those districts, and we are taking some baby steps towards that. Some of the rail technology that's being discussed, long-distance commuter rail that would come and potentially bring large trains into the core of the city, a lot of issues and unsolved problems in how to do that. Suburban commuter lines, Metro is now talking much more openly about what they've been thinking about and how to extend light rail systems or light rail type systems on rail lines out from the city. And then we have the beginnings, and we're starting to design the additional lines for our in-street urban light rail system. But all of these are only part of the answer. Because as these systems bring people into the urban core, and in particular as they begin to then have access to the urban districts, or at least close proximity to the urban districts, it doesn't solve the issues about how you move people around inside. There will be a new dynamic when things like long-distance commuter rail with large trains start to operate, because there will be a large quantity of people get off of those trains. And once our system matures over a number of years, I believe that we're going to have a long-distance commuter rail system. There'll be locations where you'll have multiple trains arriving within a few minutes of each other, coming from different parts of the city. And how we move people inside the urban districts is going to be a huge challenge. In addition to that, as parking becomes more complicated, I'm sorry, I'm in front of you. As parking becomes more complicated, as pricing goes up, as the value of property increases, and there's more thought about better ways to use that land than maybe parking structures, perimeter parking around urban districts is going to become, I believe, part of the solution. And how you move people from those perimeter parking areas to the core is a critical part. This is a graphic that several of you have seen this before, but over a series of projects I keep expanding it. But it basically is trying to describe an urban, dense urban district where you have long-distance commuter rail coming to an intermodal facility on the edge. You have freeways and tollways bringing people into the area, possibly to access perimeter parking. You have light rail systems that might go through the middle, some of them bringing people long distances so the trains are already full when they get to the urban district. You have bus rapid transit that's going to become a new part of our portfolio. And then I believe that what's missing is we don't have addressed yet the circulation systems internally that can be complementary to the pedestrian systems. Let me show you some examples of what I'm talking about. These are systems that in prior presentations like the Metro Technology Forum, I call this mini metro systems, and I'll explain to you why as we go through. It is a fully automated, driverless system, and there's a reason for that. It can be used either in corridor service or circulator service in urban districts. It generally has a moderate capacity range on the scale I'm talking about of 10 to 15,000 people per hour per direction, which is freeway equivalency. And it's very flexible in its alignment. It has a smaller envelope, it handles steeper grades, turning radius, and the like. The propulsion and suspension systems can be just about anything. And I'll show you some examples of multiple ones of this. So that's not really what we're talking about. They might be rubber tire, like the Paris Metro, by the way, is rubber tire, or they might be steel wheel. The vehicles are smaller. They operate in short trains, often as close as 1-minute headways. The reason that you can do that cost effectively is when you're fully automated, you don't have a driver on every train. So you can carry just as many people by running short, small trains on close headways. But what that does is it dramatically reduces the civil cost of your stations and your guideway structures. Let me show you some examples. Miami. 20 plus years ago, when the federal government was investing in advanced technology, they haven't really since, although there's inklings of it again. This was one of the systems that was built, of the few, the handful. It's in downtown Miami, and there was, in '94, there was some extensions to the line that I worked on, and I became more familiar with it. Here is the Metro rail system on the left that goes out some distance. There's considerable work underway to look at expanding that. And on the right is a graphic showing the central loop of downtown, which was the original one, and then the northern extension that has generally been called the Omni extension because of the Omni, what was the Omni mall up towards the north end, and then the Brickell district going to the south, now generally called the financial district. And let me just, these are aerials, but they're probably of no great significance. You can see a number of stations. In the red are circled some of the Metro rail stations. The main one that is where most transfers occur is here at the government station. And this is all dense downtown. This is the extension out to the south end. I'll show you some examples of how that is developing. In fact, when I was there a year or so ago, I took my camera, and it's amazing the development and construction that's happening around the system in downtown Miami. There's been a lot of talk about the new urban energy that's happening in downtown Miami. Here's another shot of the system with all kinds of sky-rise development going on around it. You can see that the stations can be reasonably integrated in with the urban landscape. It doesn't look like a sore thumb sticking out there. When I was there working, and over the years, many of the stations when first built looked like this. It was the station and a bunch of empty land all around it. This is one of the very few that's left like that. But the point I want to make is that they planned for the system to be there, and they provided rights of way. They even built portions of the system so that it was there when they needed it. Because now that's one of those stations that used to look like that, and now it has massive high-rise residential and office towers springing up all around it. Here's one at the end of the line, and you can see the new construction behind it, and in front here you can see the screens where there's residential development that's about to come out of the ground. This is what happens when you have an ability to move people around in a dense urban area. Miami's benefit was, partially because the federal government was paying most of the cost, they planned ahead. They provided for rights of way, station locations, and even built much of it. This is just stating what I just said. The one problem that has been noted as I've been asking my associates in Miami to stay in touch with the Miami-Dade Transit is that they said their issue is they don't have environmentally protected ways in Miami's climate like Houston to move around. So that's one of their weaknesses. What about Singapore? An amazing city, because they have looked around the world, especially at transit, and said, how can we take lessons learned in other places? They have a huge transit system, 3,000 buses. They have 2 conventional light rail lines, 2 high-capacity subway systems, and then they have also built 3 different urban districts with circulator systems. This is not one of those. I'm intrigued by this because this is the subway. This is a big train. It's fully automated, no driver on board, one of the first of this scale, and this is not what I'm talking about when I say mini metro system. The only place in the subway you can take shots is in the maintenance facility, so that's what this is. However, That drives huge slugs of people into the stations where they have to transfer to other modes to make it the last mile to their destination. The three lines that I'm referring to are, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce them properly, but three different districts that have, they call them light rail systems, but they are fully automated, in my term, mini metro systems. And there are, as you can see, quite a length and a number of stations. In fact, if you look at their route map, there are these balloons that hang off. Here's one here, and here's two more up here. So they are distributing into the urban districts a significant amount of people. You do not need a car to live in Singapore. So it is a city that's been built for that purpose. They've integrated all of this circulation systems into the urban context. It provides you the ability to get around and connect to all the other transit modes. Currently, the two suppliers that have been active there, I believe, are just Bombardier and Mitsubishi. This is a Mitsubishi car in one of those urban districts. They call it the Crystal Mover. There's now several Crystal Mover systems going in here in the U.S., mostly in airports, only in airports at this point. But it's an attractive car. It's running in one-car trains here. Here's another view. This is a seismic zone. Obviously, guideway structures get bigger. There are ways. Steve Clark over there has associates in his firm that have really developed a lot of expertise in how to compact the mass of guideways by integrating some of the structural elements a little differently than they did here. But it is integrated in with the urban system. It also has pedestrian-friendly characteristics. Circulation systems need to be integrated with pedestrian facilities, because it's the pedestrian facilities that really does get you the last, if not the last mile, the last few hundred yards. And usually in environments like ours, which is the focus, there needs to be consideration of how those pedestrian systems can be grade separated in some of the densest areas, and also weather protected as much as possible. This is some of the pedestrian facilities that allow you to interconnect easily with the stations there in Singapore. Another case study that's very intriguing is in Copenhagen. This was not a compact urban district where there is you might say, a circular circulation system, but it was a linear urban district that was created around the transit system. In fact, the creation of this urban district was what fueled the funding to build the system. They created a company, and for many years, the transit authority was this company. Orstat was a slice of land that the government owned alongside a public park, I think it was. You can see it outlined in red. And they sliced that off and gave it to the Orstat Development Company, and that company used that land to develop the property and fund the creation of the transit line that runs down to the middle of it. That shows the transit line, and this was some years ago. It shows on the right the various properties and developers and institutions that were already investing in Orstat development. But they created this urban district around, here's some of the properties that were early in the development. Here you can see a shot from one of the stations. They built the system before most of the stuff was there. And here is the view looking out into the open land. Some of it was in place. On the left there was a big department store, shopping mall. On the right you can see there's a lot of open land under construction, and there's actually a station here somewhere right in here, I believe, is the station. Again, more shots of the open land. The stations are small and compact because the trains are small. And you can do that with fully automated systems. This particular design is a nice design by Ensemble. It's a rail car, pretty conventional rail car, but it's a walkthrough. And I was very impressed by the technology that was applied. Another shot of one of the stations. This is one of the subway elements. As they get into the old town, out of this corridor I'm talking about, they go subway because of all of the very, very old buildings there. And these are some of the smallest subway stations I have ever seen. But that translates into many dollars saved. Another one that some of you may be more familiar with because it's in New York is what I call the Airport District Circulator System, or as the Port Authority calls it, the air train. That is the JFK air train as compared to the Newark air train. This is a rail car. It's built by Bombardier. There's a number of systems around the world. They're marketing it aggressively. It's actually a linear induction motor propulsion, which means that it doesn't have to worry about traction between the steel wheels and the steel rails, but they can do conventional switching and things like that. Very impressive system. It doesn't carry a whole lot of riders, but it was still a fundamentally important investment for the Port Authority to make. Now it's over 8 miles long. The reason is because it stretches all the way out to Jamaica Station, which is the main intermodal connection point for Long Island Railroad. It's also served by a New York City Transit Authority, subway. The other branch of the line goes over to Howard Beach, and there is a transit line over there that connects in with the metro system in New York City. And this particular line connects those and also carries people to various facilities on the land side and interconnection between the airside terminals. Another shot of this train as it's sitting in one of the stations. Now, if we were to be coming from Manhattan to go to JFK, we would arrive on a commuter rail train like this in a newly refurbished Jamaica Station. Port Authority took the lead in rebuilding that station, very nice architecturally. You go up escalators to this concourse, walk across all of the platforms, of which there are many at that station, down a hallway to connect to the JFK air train. When we get on that train, we would travel down the middle of the Van Wyck Expressway. This is the very reason why they built this train, because that expressway doesn't look anything like that most of the time. And there was no way to get people effectively from the main hub of the transportation system at Jamaica Station into Kennedy Airport. And getting there by car was an incredible nightmare. We will get there someday. We're not to that point yet. This is what it looks like on board the train. And you arrive at stations here in the terminal. The terminals are on the right. There's a pedestrian connection across from other parking as well. And this is the station on the left. A very effective and nice system. The Port Authority's investment was well worth it because it kept JFK viable as an airport. And they were choking. People couldn't get there. What about pedestrian connections? Making pretty good time, David. I think we'll be okay. Back to the graphic. Pedestrian connections have to be there in order for circulator systems to work. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it's low technology. I'll show you why I use that expression in a minute. But this interconnection of pedestrian facilities is very important. Now, they might just be walkable environments like we talk about in some of our initiatives in transit-oriented development. Generally, I think in those environments, people would tend to walk, particularly if you're in Cotentai in Houston, you tend to walk less than 1,000 feet outdoors. Obviously, you can do more, but that's kind of, to me, an order of magnitude of what's comfortable, unless it's a Saturday and you're strolling. Pedestrian-friendly environment. I was trying to remember, David, what the guy that spoke on pedestrian stuff a few months ago used, but he had rankings of friendliness for pedestrians. Yeah, I couldn't remember to put them in there. But here you're involved with interaction with street traffic. You're exposed to the environment. It can be a testy environment at times. We have some nice conditions of this downtown. I didn't have a photo that's where you show all the restaurants and stuff, which would have been better. But there are some nice pedestrian facilities along our light rail system in downtown, as an example. But then you can go to the next level, which is tunnel and skyway systems. We're very familiar with that in Houston. Generally here, though, I still think pedestrian trips, most of us would probably be reluctant to go much more than half a mile. Maybe we would if we needed to. But usually this type of system is not well suited for going much further than that. Great separation from street traffic is a huge plus protected weather controlled or controlled environment and from inclement weather is another huge plus. And in our urban districts, I believe the densest ones over time, that's going to be absolutely essential. Here you're familiar with this. This happens to be in the medical center. They're investing a lot of money in the medical center to build a continuously expanding sky bridge system. The key is, which isn't done here and needs to be done for any of the systems I'm talking about, is you have to be able to get directly from the pedestrian system to the transit station. And that has to be an integral part of the design. This is downtown Houston. You can see in the color coding, if you haven't seen this before, this is impressive. There's quite a network of underground and some above ground pedestrian connections. But I dare say very few people would choose to come from Houston Center over here to Allen Center via that network, because that's a long way and it's not a straight shot. But it works. It works very well. And unless you've worked downtown, and myself included, I don't really know and understand it. I get lost very easily. But it's an important element. This is the kind of thing that can make it, can bring to completion what we need to do. Here is the ultimate plan for Texas Medical Center. The dark brown are the existing skywalks. The gold are, I think, the next ones up being planned, and the red are what they hope to build someday, something like that. I can't read the graphic myself. But the color coding represents an ultimate system. Because it's being built in bits and pieces by other institutions building their piece, it's somewhat complex, but it's the beginning. Now there's another element that I think can take us to the next level. It's brand new. Steve's nodding his head over there because his company is working with some of the suppliers on this in guideway design. It's generally called personal rapid transit. For 30 years we've talked about it. If this were a room full of transit engineers, hardcore transit engineers, you'd all be rolling your eyes because you've heard about this for 30 years and it hasn't happened. But there are currently 3 developers that have real hardware that is either in implementation now in projects or in full test track mode. And this will be real very soon. One system within a few months. What it is it's a small personal size system, at least in pure concept of PRT, where you get on board, it's your vehicle, and it goes from where you got on, you tell it where you want to go, and it doesn't stop till it gets to your station. Very convenient. It's basically a taxi, fully automated taxi. And there are many, I shouldn't say many, there are multiple other developers working now. In fact, there was a fellow from Austin that called me the other day. Did he make it? He was saying he might come. That has at least a PRT-like development that he has some work on. His or all of them? All of them are fully automated. Here's one that's called Ultra, built by a company called ATS. I think that's Automated Transit Systems Limited. Bristol, England is where they're based. Note that the vehicles are very small, therefore the guideways are very light. In fact, this particular guideway, that particular one, happens to be on their test track, and I think they had multiple spans that they erected in a few hours or something like that. And the erection at their first project, which is Heathrow Airport, was also very quick. You can see the guideway on the left there. It's actually a retrofit because the airport was designed and substantially the structures were built when they made the decision to put the Ultra system in. And so they've actually taken one of the levels of the parking garage and converted that to be the station at the terminal. That's very interesting. And so we'll all be watching closely. You'll probably see all kinds of news reports over the next few months as they come online, if you haven't already. This is another technology. This one is in Sweden. This is a test track. It's all obviously prototype. But it is real hardware with very knowledgeable transit engineers leading the development. I was impressed with the people and their state of development. But this is another technology that you can watch. Now this one, being in Sweden, is designed with some features in mind that are very important to them. like operation in any type of ice and snow condition. This system is well designed for that. Analysis methodologies. If you're not asleep, this may put you there, but there are a few of you that may be interested in the room. When you're dealing with multimodal elements in a dense urban environment, you have to be able to analyze all the modes and their interaction with each other together. For example, this is some of the types of systems or facilities or modes that need to be understood and addressed if you're going to be designing on how to bring all of these different technologies and modes together. We have been developing simulation tools. There's a little bit of an advertisement here. I'm sorry, it's just that I'm going to talk about our methodology a little bit. Part of what you have to be able to do is be able to study the choices people make within an urban district. In the region, we have huge models that are used to try and estimate mode split, as it's called. And that's how many people we choose to ride a train versus drive on the freeway. Within an urban district, it gets a lot more complicated because things like how far you have to walk, how level changes you have to make, how long you have to wait for the train, how much it costs you to park in this location versus that location are all aspects that you consider when you decide whether I'm going to get my car out of parking and drive across downtown where I want to have lunch or have a meeting, or whether I'm going to walk through the tunnel system all the way there, or go downstairs and get up to that fancy new automated system that they just built and ride it around to the other side. And this is a marginal graphic. I do some of these on my own, so it's not very good, but it's just showing some competing path choices. The purple is intended to represent what if I walked across downtown. The black is what if I got my car out of parking and drove over there. And the blue is what if I got on the new Circulator system and rode around several station stops to get off. You have to be able to analyze these types of competing paths and do appropriate modal choice. Our software is called ALPS, the Advanced Land Transportation Performance Simulation. We built it around this approach because we are preparing ourselves to do this kind of job in our planning and engineering. For example, in a given model, this is a very old model we did years and years ago at Texas Medical Center, but it shows that in a given trip assignment, a path assignment, there are an automobile component, parking component, they may have a cost associated with it, a transit component, and a pedestrian component that all have to be embraced as you study this type of dense environment. I'm not going to go into what macroscopic, mesoscopic, and microscopic means. Some of you know what that is because HGAC, the guys on this floor, are trying to embrace some of that. But there's a great usefulness in being able to use all of those different elements in the analytical process. And what we're developing that I'm excited about is we're able to do hybrids, where we're able to do part of the model in one type of processing and part of the model in another type of processing. But that's getting too geeky, so I'm going to stop. Just some still shots from a couple of models recently. This happens to be a model of downtown. This is not downtown Houston. I didn't use that one. This is downtown Minneapolis, where we were studying the planting of a new baseball stadium in the middle of downtown and extension of the light rail system to service that. And we were looking at the interaction between cars and people and trains in downtown Minneapolis. What you're able to do when you simulate the whole environment is you're able to look very in great detail at demand conditions and of flow rates, of occupancies. This happens to be of a pedestrian segment. You can look at even levels of service conditions in small time increments, down to the point of the intersection where people are ganging up waiting for the light to change so they can go across. That can be really important in your decisions on how you get across to the other side of the urban district. And we embrace a whole 24-hour period because the off times are as important in many ways as the peak times, particularly with some technologies that are applied. We call it holistic. That rings a bell more in California than it does here, but it's a holistic analysis approach. And it includes functional, performance, and operational types of analysis. This is an example of a transit system of some work I did for Bay Area Rapid Transit 5 or 6 years ago. The top is a graphic, and this is a BART rail station right here. And that rail station was being studied by BART as to what would it be like. They put in a PRT type, although it was a bigger vehicle, but a demand-responsive circulation system to service Alameda Island, which is developing rapidly. It's actually the city of Alameda. That's where one of the military bases is that we shut down and it's being redeveloped. And so in these models, we build the guideway systems and the vehicle performance characteristics, the control systems. We can use this model to do a number of different case studies. The point I would make regarding general urban districts is the case studies might include, let's test a bus circulator, manually operated bus circulator system, a new sky bridge system versus a light rail loop or streetcar loop versus a automated mini metro system. You can test all of those types of modes as alternatives with the exact same demand conditions, and they'll all have different pedestrian connection aspects, but you can test all of those and get an apples-to-apples comparison, and all kinds of graphs and charts, tables, and everything else. So that's my little bit of analytical stuff. I apologize if it seems a little commercial. Where does that leave us? With time, we're doing pretty good. What are we missing? Let me show you an example of what I think we're missing. We did a pure top-level concept study of Texas Medical Center, for Texas Medical Center a few years ago. And we were to look at just defining the idea of a circulator system for Texas Medical Center. Now, Texas Medical Center really is much, the district is much larger. This graphic shows Rice on the top, the main campus in the middle that we all call Texas Medical Center. But to the south, there's a whole lot of things growing, And so that campus is not even just the size that we envision of it today for what needs to be planned for. For example, just the University of Texas and MD Anderson, in their partnership, have, as we're probably pretty familiar with the hospital facilities and the student buildings and all that, in the main central campus up on the north, they call it, in this graphic, it was being described as the north campus, but in the south campus, they're developing all these other facilities. And they have to move people back and forth between those two campuses. And actually, there's a whole other campus in the middle that's not, that their facilities aren't in, called, I think they're calling it the mid-campus, where a whole lot of things are starting to come out of the ground. How do you deal with this circulation issue? They have already built remote parking facilities of substantial scale. Some of them are served by the light rail system, and it fills it to capacity. Some of them are being served by busing operations, but they're needing to continue to look at how to build more remote parking facilities and move people around. In fact, many of the institutions, if not most of the institutions, are already running their own bus shuttles from all these facilities too. And that's a big question, how do we deal with that? There was, we did a period of a few weeks, we had some workshops, we developed some concept ideas, and this was what was left at the end of that brief study. There was more to come, there may still be more to come, but it hasn't happened in the immediate past. Phase one, how can we make all these buses work together? They're in the process of thinking about that right now. How do we do a consolidated busing operation? Phase two, you start to build aerial guideway circulator systems in pieces. Graphically, what does that look like? These are pure conceptual. I've already been dinged about the alignments aren't right. I know they're not right. It's not what it's intended to do. It's intended to show simple concepts. This is what it might look like with bus operations serving those different areas. For example, here would be a parking intermodal facility with buses pulling up next to it. They're probably going to have to start going higher density, stack their parking because of the value of land is so important to them out there. But then, in a later phase, you could build the initial piece. Since MD Anderson is driving a lot of the concerns, the first piece that we conceptualized, and MD Anderson helped pay for part of the study, so obviously we would think about that, is a connector between the south campus and the north campus. But you can see dotted lines there of other parts of the circulator. And as you go out in future years, oops, I went too far. The next thing you might do is close in the first circulator loop. What I was thinking about by Metro correctly is that concept, oops, it didn't go to the intermodal bus terminal and light rail terminal there, but it was just intended to be a concept, so I apologize. In the real alignment studies, that would be fixed. And then you might, as that mid-campus area develops, you would begin to build pieces of another loop that could, in fact, connect people along that. Would it look like this? No. Would a little bit of engineering change all of this? Yes. But is it a concept? That's what I'm telling you about. It's a concept. Now, the important thing is that where that guideway goes for a higher capacity system that I think needs to be planned for is the backbone. You can't just run it down the middle of between all the hospitals necessarily. That may not be possible. So what probably is practical is to ring the level of development that's there now, or at least do enough design to preserve the right-of-way, so that in the years to come, when money becomes available, because it's obviously not now, as it makes sense to and make those investments, you've protected a place for it to go. That's really the message. We have to begin to think ahead and protect the places for it to go. And then there comes the day when maybe we can connect some really high capacity system like commuter rail into that system so that people really can get from Rosenberg to the Methodist Hospital and do it without a car. This graphic was one we used in the HGAC study. So what are the conclusions? Over the next 20 to 30 years, we recommended that mobility will be determined to a great extent by how they plan ahead for a dedicated circulator system. The same is true for downtown Houston, and even though it's not so dense now, the same is true for uptown Galleria and Greenway Plaza. If we don't begin to plan now and preserve rights-of-way and know what we're going to do, it's going to be either a lot more expensive or impossible to get it done. And a phased program that can move through technology developments as it occurs is an important part of that. So, my final point, we have to begin planning. Why didn't it spell very good? I'm sorry, this all came together very quickly. We have to begin planning for a future multimodal transit system for Houston. It needs to include local bus routes, light rail transit, bus rapid transit, suburban commuter lines like Metro's planning, and long-distance commuter lines. Guess what? We're already thinking about all of those. But what we're not thinking about is how to make that last mile connection for large quantities of people from either rail stations or remote parking facilities or the expanding density of urban districts and move them around in a way that's efficient, comfortable, safe, and cost-effective. These are very expensive systems relative to even the light rail system we're building. But they are part of the solution that the rest of the world is seeing needs to be invested in. The last point about full automation, as we think about how we might connect all of this, a presentation a few months ago, Siemens is one of the companies that's very active in full automation, and I'm active in an international committee of people from around the world that work with fully automated transit systems. They tell me that in Europe, if I got this right from this presentation, the last 10 new starts, where it's a new system, have been fully automated systems, generally of this mini metro class. Think about that. Now they have trams, as they call it, everywhere, but the new systems they're building are the fully automated systems because their operations and maintenance is very cost effective. They can build smaller, lighter, fixed facilities, and they can run them safer and more cost effectively than systems operated by humans. As we look at this part of town that's going to become the densest part of our core, and we have these major urban districts already there, our long-term solution made these circulator systems. And as my last slide, a few minutes before I came over here, I said, well, what if we let those represent the circulator systems. Over the very long haul, you could even easily connect them. I'm not saying that we don't need to do the things that we're doing right now. Metro is doing the right things now. But the light rail system will not be able to carry the load that will move within that circle as this part of town becomes very, very dense over the very long haul. And so there has to be other systems that do that. And one way to do it is to start with the mini metro applications in the urban districts and then ultimately be able to interconnect them. That would work and be a good supplement to what we're already studying about to do. So that's the thought.
So before we do questions, I wanted to note two things. One is I want to thank Jeff Table and HCC for all the years of letting us use this space. Wonderful. And convenient. And two, if you haven't signed in, if you're not on our list, I wanted to go ahead and pass this around. And we're doing so much stuff right now that you almost are required to get our newsletter, which comes out every Monday night. So there you are. By the way, our website is updated almost every day, and our newsletter, which comes out on Monday night, is a compilation of everything that happened the previous week, everything that's all added to the website, so all the events and stuff. So I have a question. You were, and maybe you don't have a good way to talk about this, but you had showed me once some really, really interesting stuff, I believe it was about Los Angeles Union Station, and about what a problem it is when 1,000 people arrive at a station to get off a train. Right. Now what happens, and a minute later another train arrives, and your model talks about that. Oh, it's fascinating to watch. But what are the issues that are involved there, and will we be confronting as we begin to bring commuter rail together with light rail? So just moving the people off the train.
Right. One of the things that came up at the end of the commuter rail study was the recommendation from the study team that a major operational hub, as we called it, be pursued. And the site that we recommended is along the West Loop. And what that site, it's captured now before development overwhelms it, would allow us to operate a regional commuter rail system. It would allow us to operate intercity trains, and they would connect well into the rest of the modal system. And I won't go into that because I talked about that a year ago when I was here. But when we do that, we will have to move large quantities of people out of that site. There likewise will be a large and prominent modal station in downtown Houston, or for downtown Houston. And there will be large quantities of people that come in when multiple trains arrive off of that, and you have to move them. Now you can either stage 15 or 20 buses somewhere, where you may need to do that anyway, just to get them into downtown. Or you can do like LA Union Station did, you build a high-capacity subway underneath the rail terminal that can carry 20 or 30,000 people an hour into downtown. I don't propose that. We made that choice 25 years ago when we killed the first system that was going to be 80% federally funded, and we didn't build a subway through downtown. The option is to create systems that are smaller scale, but when complementary with the other systems that are there, can move significantly large quantities of people. And that is exactly the problem that I foresee. If we don't start planning now for the facilities and the systems, we're not going to be able to catch up.
Let me just ask a little more. You've talked about what happens when a train with 1,000 people on it comes to a light rail connection.
Well,
and
it doesn't
handle
work.
Those 1,000 people.
It doesn't work. Now that would be the maturity of Los Angeles commuter rail system now to see those types of loads, but it could happen. If you have 2 or 3 trains that arrive and 300 or 400 people get off of each one, you've got the same problem. One thing we're finding with the light rail system is that you can move a lot of people, several hundred people on each train, but realistically the headway between trains is constrained by the fact that they have to move through the street systems and the traffic signal system. So they're not the ultimate answer. Are they the right next step? Absolutely yes. Are they the ultimate answer? No. But they're a part of the answer. We need some higher capacity systems. Now, for example, if it were a dual guideway circulator system serving a rail station, you could move 10 to 15,000 people per hour both ways if it's a circulator, because if you, generally speaking, a lot of these, if you need to, you can go the other direction because it'll get you back to where you need to go. That's the kind of capacities I think we need to be planning for. Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm Dexter Handy. I'm a candidate for District G City Council. I've been challenged with a number of questions by people that live out in District G. I embrace this idea, but does this model take into consideration people who have luggage or baggage, people who want to go to and from the supermarket and carry stuff home, or is that something out of the scope of this whole model?
Most of these systems I've showed you are configured for people to easily walk in and stand, and so if they're pulling a cart, that would be no problem at all. They're not, the longer distance rides are where you tend to have everybody seated. But that's very common these days for automated systems. Yes, Steve?
Well, Sam, I think for the most part, you're in here preaching to the converted today, and part of our task is everybody is to get out and help people understand that certain things like, for one thing, this idea that you put up there about multimodal travel, or journeys where you use multi-modes, including walking, that is just a part of life in most major European cities that they don't think twice about, and yet to us it's a very foreign concept. And so getting people to understand that this is actually allows a reasonable quality of life to do that is very good. I'd like to make another comment that you talked about the price of these things. Well, we just spent a whole lot of money in this government helping people buy cars to replace older cars with new cars that isn't going to really make a dent in the overall utilization of energy or carbon, but it does give a little shot into the arm of the auto industry. Yet if you took all the vehicles that are purchased and maintained and the price of all that and compared that with public transportation, it might pay for itself there. You talked about the Ultra system, and that's going in at Heathrow, and it is taking people initially from the parking lot with all their luggage to the terminal to get on an airplane and go off to some foreign land. And I really didn't understand personal rapid transit, and I wasn't a big proponent of it until I began to understand it. And then once I understood it, I realized that it is a very good solution to this last mile problem and could be implemented because the footprint isn't big, it's very secure, and it provides you your own personal little vehicle to use while you use it. And that's a big argument for Texans, that they don't want to have to get into a public transportation vehicle that other people are in for some reason. And the last thing I want to say is that your advertising is appreciated and accepted because it's very kind of you to so generously give your time here, and so you're allowed to make those little indiscretions, by all means.
Well, some other time I'll give you the full presentation. It's about 45 minutes.
All right, well, I look forward to that.
Now, let me make a comment. Before we run out here all as a bunch of PRT fanatics, let me just say this. I've resisted labeling myself as a PRT consultant, even though a lot of people would consider me one of the more knowledgeable people around for PRT systems, because it's only one slice of the answer. It cannot serve the type of demands that we're going to need as the only means of circulation in some of our urban districts. I consider it a pedestrian scale system. And it's what makes it work with, if your circulator is around the outside of the urban district and you've got walking systems in between, but people really can't make it all the way across downtown on those walking systems, it's another piece of the puzzle. Over time, we'll learn more about PRT and we may have more confidence. But I'm doing a study right now for a client at an airport where we're comparing those types of systems. And the PRT system, yes, it ends up being cheaper, but it's operating right at a threshold of capacity. Generally, the stations end up being the capacity constraint. And we've got a lot to learn, and we need to take some baby steps, and Heathrow's a good first baby step. Jeff?
Well, just speaking of PRT, some of you may know the Ultra Systems people were here talking to both Intercontinental, and we set up a meeting with the West Chase District. And it was interesting, you talked about the cost. They did a very quick and dirty sketch plan of a 12-station system there at West Chase. It said it would be about $300 million, which is a lot, but then again, it isn't when you think about some of the other things we've spent $300 million on here recently.
Million with an M, right?
Yes, million. And I think very interesting because you're right, a place like West Chase, even though it's dense, 70,000 jobs, is imagining the infrastructure to make that walkable would probably be more than $300 million if PRT seems well suited. But the question I have on all that is, who is going to pay and operate these things? This is much greater than any of the largest management districts' budgets would be capable of. That doesn't really seem like a thing that Metro would operate. The city of Houston, I don't know. Who do you see as actually developing and operating these systems if they are to become ubiquitous?
Well, actually, I had this slide here, the last slide, and I took it and moved it because there are a bunch of questions. We have developed this conglomerate of agencies and quasi-governmental entities that have their own territories, but everybody says, well, it's somebody else's job to do that part of it. And I don't know the answer. They are good questions. The smaller scale systems, maybe it makes sense for the management district to own and operate that. At some point, Metro steps in and says, okay, that's big enough for me to take charge of that. I don't know the answers.
Well, Sam, I'm sorry.
The fragmentation that you just described is basically these solutions apply to 20th century world. We don't plan before we grow. We grow and then we try to fix it. So the concern that I have is whatever mode you choose to serve a particular problem, you either are serving pre-existing growth, which then attracts more growth, or you take it in an undeveloped area to spur growth, and it comes. So we never catch up. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the solutions because the real problem is, as David's been talking about for years, is you plan before you grow. You got infrastructure, you got water, you got all these other needs aside from transportation. So consider a moratorium in Houston, Texas. Leave it on that note.
Sam, I'd submit that we haven't quite figured out the whole business model for transportation of people, and that if you look at the West Chase area, or well, let's step back. Let's look at Hong Kong, where MTRC, they use retail, commercial, and residential development as part of their business model, and in fact, that's what pays for it.
Or the Copenhagen model.
Okay, yeah, and you take like West Chase or Greenway, where you have so many businesses, so many commercial entities that they could actually become a part of the partnership, if you will, of a concession, and whether they're direct or indirect benefits, that model exists out there in the world for them to become a partner of the transportation system, where the infrastructure, the really expensive part, is provided by the local government or governments, as it were.
Right. How you pay for it is always the biggest question. When I was a young man, there was an old man that I explained these ideas, and he'd say, well, how are you going to pay for it? And I never understood that until I got older, I guess.
If we had some scale ideas here, what does it cost to build a major freeway interchange? $600 million.
Oh, it's in the hundreds of millions
So $300 million to do a whole system at West Chase.
versus an interchange. That's probably a good comparison.
You know, the whole Katy freeway expansion costs more than this entire light rail system we're going to put out in the 65 neighborhood. So the scale stuff is, I mean, I saw some people talking yesterday about this high-speed rail system could wind up for the nation costing $100 billion. We could never afford it. And I think, well, wait a minute, we just spent $700 billion on stimulus like that. We gave $700 billion more to banks than just managed. I mean, what's $100 billion for a whole
That's,
nation this
well, got
size?
like $1 trillion a year debt.
And why are we, you know, relative to Spain, a poor nation? How does that happen? They can do thousands of miles of high-speed rail and everything it takes to support that middle-of-the-last mile. And we can't.
And
It's
David,
about choices. It's about choices.
and yesterday at the transportation event that Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst spoke at, he spoke for about half an hour and never talked about public transportation. It was all, we got to build more roads in Texas.
Yeah, I noticed
Because they contribute to this campaign.
Well, we're
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
When Metro started talking about the university line, several of us in this room talked to Metro about making that line elevated for all sorts of reasons, primarily to speed construction and to make construction less of an impact. And we were constantly told that you can't do elevated economically because, number one, people won't ride the escalator up to the station, one level above ground. But your systems are all elevated. Now, does that really work? Does it work in Miami? Does it work in Singapore? And people aren't afraid to get on an escalator and go up a level.
Well, if you've never been in DuPont Circle's escalator, 5 stories or something like that, I mean, people, and it's full of people.
Honestly, I think
Metro's
that
explanation never made any sense to me because every subway system I've ever been on, you ride an escalator. I just came from San Francisco where to get on their air train, you get on escalators.
Do you think it might have been the fact that the developers who didn't get a chance to have a piece of that job didn't favor it because they didn't have a piece of it, so they were going to find any reason to say that people don't like it?
I mean, a bigger concern, in Boston, we ended up taking down all of our, from there, we ended up taking down all of our elevated systems because it kills retail on the street level. It was horrible for small business.
to move the people. Now, an interesting thing is that when we built all those tunnels downtown, all the retail went with it. If you build pedestrian systems above ground like there are now in Center, the retail goes with it. So I don't see that it kills the retail, it's just the retail may redistribute. And it's not like the whole urban district is aerial, it's just where the transit system goes. We could do it subway. I'm not sure after living here for 35 years, even as a transit engineer, that subways are the best solution. They are possible. And maybe in the end, that's the only thing that makes sense. But I'm showing you examples for urban districts that tend to go the significantly lower cost aerial systems.
Sam, what we're finding in some of our projects around the world is that subways in urban, or tunneling in urban districts is actually much less environmentally disruptive from a social justice, the whole, from an economic perspective, the whole 9 yards. It is, in dense urban districts, it is more economical to go with a tunnel.
If you're cutting across,
Yes.
one of the concepts I think we need to look at is if we preserve a right-of-way around the edge of what's the current development and protect it, then it wouldn't be as much impact.
Yeah.
Subway is possible. Occasionally we'd have to pump out all the water and repair everything, but it's possible.
That's part of the engineering.
Yes.
So you have a picture up there of instances in New York, of, yeah, of the train going down the middle of the freeway.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about it was the right of way was, what, 8 feet or something? I mean,
Yeah, that was very expensive to build,
well,
but that's true. Van Wyck, one of the busiest freeways in the world, probably, they built it down the middle.
so the issue is like we constantly preserving right of ways. You see this a lot, and one of the places we have right of way that's owned by the public is, of course, this enormous system that we use to create the connections to all of our business centers and our homes and so forth. I mean, there it is. That's the system. And so, what do you think about that? At some point, why wouldn't we use exactly the same network to do exactly the same connections, but with higher capacity vehicles?
I think that if we take that approach, if we were to take that approach, we need to be willing to take the system away from that freeway right-of-way into the urban district for the stations. Places that have put stations in the middle of freeways, I think, have been hampered a little bit by people getting to them. But as long as you're willing to separate out when you get to the places where stations make sense away from the right-of-way, all those are.
A little further, you would never think of saying, okay, people can park a car in the middle of the freeway and get off somehow. And you would take them somewhere, an off-ramp, go somewhere. You couldn't go right through a building. You've got escalators and all that.
I think line haul systems down corridors, that makes a lot more sense, but they probably need some way to distribute people from there to the surrounding urban areas, which is back to kind of the idea that I'm talking about. Yes, ma'am.
I don't remember where I read this, but it was a futuristic idea. If you visualize a regular train with the cargo bays, that they have the different ones that are latched together. This was a concept that you took a train of commuter cars, like little mini smart cars or something like that, and you would run them all in through the same location, and then people could individually take their little cars wherever they wanted to within that thing, and then once they're done, it would somehow get back to like GPS or whatever, get back to where it's supposed to go. So it's just like a train, but it's a train composed of very small cars that could then take you to the last mile more directly. And then when you're done with it, you just drop it off. You don't have to go back to where you were. I thought it was an interesting concept.
The dual mode ideas are pretty strong. In fact, the fellow from Austin, I guess he's not here. I thought he was coming. It's a dual mode concept, where you drive your vehicle to a point where it gets on the guideway and then it runs. Not in my lifetime, and I'm not saying it's a future. I think there's going to be a lot of, in this century, there's going to be a lot of changes, but I don't know if that one will ever come to fruition. One of the problems with taking a private vehicle that I own and putting it in an automated system is that who's liable if something doesn't work right?
Well, these are actually publicly owned cars. Yeah, you can just drop off and just pick up into another car.
Most fully automated systems, the price of the controls is prohibitive of that. Although some of the PRT suppliers say they're figuring out ways to bring it down, so we'll see. Yes, sir.
In the area of choices, you mentioned the I-10 newly reconstructed. They've got toll road down the middle, and when the traffic is really backed up, the people that pay that toll and ride that toll road.
Right.
But the minute the traffic drops off just a little bit, that toll road is almost empty. And I think that is the way people think. Unless you've got federal money to build something, they don't want to put their money into the project. And Miami had the federal money. You've got a congressman that can get you some federal money, or a senator to build you a project, you're in business. But without that federal money, people don't want to spend their own money for it.
I think that paying for advanced systems like this, sorry, I should turn my phone off. Paying for advanced systems is going to be what takes a long time. I'm just noting that if we don't plan for them and provide for them and protect the future opportunities when the money does become available, and if our situation gets as bad as I think it will over time, the money will be found. But if we don't have a place to put it, and we haven't thought about it, it's not in the plan, then it may not be possible. So that's my main message, is let's start thinking about it.
You just mentioned anything about futurists looking at airways for transportation instead of at grade or elevator. And I seem to recall there has been some developments, either by NASA or somebody, for personally operated aircraft of some kind. Are you dreaming that, or
Well,
why is it being ignored?
I will say that a few years ago, when my company got really excited about a small private jet where 3 or 4 people can go down to the local airfield and get in a jet and go across to New Mexico and for business and come back that afternoon, but it never took, as the saying goes, it never took off. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know about that.
Imagine what that would look like if we had 1 million of those flying around.
I understand that in New York City, and if I have this right, right now they have a system where you can just go call up and they're like these little rental cars, or like just zippers or whatever. You just get it wherever you are, and you take it to point B, and you leave it there, and someone else picks it up there. I mean, it's just basically a rental.
Bicycles too.
They have that in Houston too, zip cars at Rice University.
But I'm just thinking of some of these.
All of those things I think are going to be part of the ultimate solution.
Well, at the med center, don't the, like Methodist Hospital, if you show up as a patient, maybe you can't walk too well, whatever the case may be, you not feeling too well, you just bring your car down and give it to a valet. And it's the same price as if you didn't use the valet. But the employees park, I think, somewhere else, because that parking lot garage is, its capacity sort of balances the capacity of Methodist Hospital to deliver patient services. They kind of balance that a little bit, which means no employees park in the parking garage.
Well, the employees' parking is paid for if they park somewhere else.
That's what I'm saying.
What happens on rainy days is they don't want to park in the big open parking lot. They'll pay to park at the hospital and fill up the parking. That's one of their issues.
They can play like they're sick.
Yeah.
You know, we do very serious planning regionally for what we call sprawl development. We know the cave gets done like that to accommodate, among other things, 170,000 people living on segment E of the Grand Parkway. Well, 170,000 people living on that mean that fast ride on I-10 is history as soon as that comes to pass, right? But we do plan, and we do spend enormous quantities. I mean, $100 billion regional transportation plan that is 98% roads for sprawl development. Nobody's planning for dense development is what the point is. There is no planning ahead of time outside of the corridor stuff, which isn't really planning, it's just allowing. For what if a lot of people decide they don't want to live way out first, they want to live closer together, what will we do about it? This is not, as far as I know, on anybody. I mean, a lot of people are thinking about it, but there's no formal how to deal with it.
The tower, the Ashby Tower, that's the solution to your question.
What's that project? There's no
That's it,
fabulous project on those transit systems. You know, we've made suburban sidewalks next to it.
I saw a billboard that said railroad to shopping, and I think it said paddle boat to schools. One of the large developments on the west side. So there is a transportation system.
But it's all, well, that's kind of what it's all about. For a while.
Have you guys ever been to the Schlierbahn and New Braunfels? We got 3 different parks. They got buses. They got tubes you can pick up from a big pile of tubes. And they got tubes all queued up ready for you to go. It's kind of a similar concept. You know, where you want to pay to get into the intermodal system. And you just scan your card and flip on a shared card. They just queue up for you.
I remember when I first got into this stuff, somebody telling me that Walt Disney was the greatest transit designer. You know, because people thought it was fun what they did at Disney World and so forth, riding that monorail. But it actually served the purpose of moving in just a
Worked for 50 years.
Yeah.